Part 70. Online games, I really don't want to have unlimited fusion. Author, 7 years. Chapter 691. Chapter 691 Talking about marriage. Danger. Reminding Suchen that his goal had been achieved, he tied the mouth of the bag tightly and said to Suchen, "This blue rabbit is cold in nature, and you are too skinny to eat it. Anyway, Dad, I don't plan to bake it. I heard someone in town was collecting blue rabbits a few days ago, so I can exchange a few silver coins for you to save. In 2 or 3 years, I will buy 2 cuckoo cows and tie them with red flowers to ask for a housewife for you, haha." Suchen couldn't help but blush after listening to his father's words. He has been a young boy in his whole life, but he has never had any meat. Although he and the 3 like-minded brothers had talked about men and women in the past, but after all, it stopped at theory. Now that I was only 12 years old, my father was eager to ask for a wife. I couldn't help but think of that silly girl Sally, and her face was red. Although Dudley's father was an honest and responsible person, but looking at his son like that, he didn't know what Suchen was thinking, so he said clearly, "I think Silly is a pretty good girl. She and you are childhood sweethearts and we stick together every day. Why don't we wait until you are 25 to get married?" Your Uncle Joer also fully agrees. Suchen was both shy and elated at the same time. Suddenly, Dudley's father's burly body tightened, and he held Suchen with his big hands. He did not speak, but slowly explored the surroundings with sharp eyes. Suchen was caught by his father. This situation was frightening. Since his debut, Suchen had never seen his father look so nervous, so he couldn't help but try to tighten his nerves and look around. After a while, Suchen heard his father's breathing getting heavier. The thick palm holding his hand was also sweating. Suchen glanced at his father in a panic, but found that his father's forehead was covered with sweat. At this time, Dudley's father finally made a downward gesture. The father and son squatted down. But Suchen didn't see any relief in his father's expression. On the contrary, he became more and more serious. "Suchen," Dudley's father said to Suchen as quietly as possible, "look at my gestures later, and you should quickly ambush behind the old bark tree at the back. Do you understand?" "Dad, where is the old skin tree? 3 miles away." Suchen subconsciously felt something was wrong and asked. At this time, his father gave Suchen an unprecedented stern look and shouted in a low voice, "What do you know? If you are told to ambush, just do it. This time he is a big fat man. If he is caught, he can be sold for a lot of money." Speaking of this, Dudley's father's expression showed a hint of warmth. He seemed to be reluctant to touch Suchen's head, and his tone became much softer. "When I go back this time, I will settle the marriage between you and that girl Sally. In a few years, we will have a fat boy in our family, you know." Suchen nodded, but his eyes were fixed on his father's expression. After a while, Dudley's father took a deep breath, gently pushed Suchen with his left hand, and Suchen immediately headed towards the town. Old Pisha ran. Dudley's father looked at his son's thin figure fading away reluctantly, quietly wiped the corners of his eyes, straightened up his burly body, and ran towards the right side of the dense forest, originally briskly and silently. But the steps were one step at a time, stepping hard on the rotten grass. Following the bang 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 sound of Dudley's father's footsteps, there seemed to be a few rustling sounds behind the leaves. Online games, I really don't want to have unlimited fusion. Author, 7 years. Chapter 692. Chapter 692 Fierce Volcano Cat. Father and son depend on each other. Dudley's father leaned against a tall tree and listened. He panted slightly and pulled out a hatchet from his backpack. He clasped his hands tightly and stared intently into the depths of the jungle ahead. Sure enough, an animal the size of a wild bobcat emerged from the dense branches and leaves, but its fur was as red as fire, and the branches and leaves that brushed against its body were all curled and browned. This animal is none other than the fierce volcano cat that makes all hunters jealous. Even an outstanding hunter like Dudley would not dare to face such a monster. Dudley's father died at the claws of the fierce volcano cat. Thinking of this, Dudley smiled bitterly. His father had sent him away to save him, and now he had sent Suchen away for his son. This was the fate of our family. After calculating the time, Suchen should be far away by now. Dudley smiled reassuringly and held the hatchet tighter. He yelled at the wooing fiery volcano cat, "Come on, you beast, you killed my father back then, and now I'm here to collect debt from you, come on, ha 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 ha." Dudley shouted loudly. He yelled, but didn't move at all. His eyes were fixed on the fierce volcano cat. Dudley knew how cunning this volcano cat was, and he must not be fooled by it. Sure enough, the volcano cat actually took elegant steps, its green eyes seemed to be joking, and from time to time it bared its fangs at the humans in front of it. Seeing that the human opposite was unmoved, he suddenly rushed forward and sprayed a fireball towards Dudley's right side. The fireball exploded with a bang, and Dudley threw himself towards the left side in embarrassment. Looking back, he saw that the fireball only burned for a while on the right side before going out, but the volcano cat stepped back with a half-smiling expression. Dudley looked back. He couldn't help but smile bitterly. It seemed that he was not qualified to fight with this volcano cat. It was obvious that this beast was playing with him. Suddenly the volcano cat dodged to the side, and a thin figure stumbled out from behind it. Dudley took a look. The canthus was about to split, but it turned out to be his son Suchen, who he thought had gone far away. Suchen knew that Dudley's father was deliberately sending him away when his father ordered him to ambush him at Liapai tree, so he quietly found a shadowy place. He hid. Later, listening to his father's heavy footsteps confirmed his father's intention. Suchen was very anxious. It was obvious that his father was using him as bait, otherwise there would be no old man in this dangerous jungle. Dad behaved so abnormally. So he secretly followed his father far away, fearing that his father would find out. The next scene scared Suchen half to death. A legendary hunter-killer fiery volcano cat appeared. So when the lynx spewed out the first mouthful of fire towards Dudley's father, Suchen couldn't help but sneak up behind the volcano cat, grabbed a hatchet and gave it a hard chop. But he didn't expect that this beast would be so gentle, as he knew it already. He dodged in a flash. Suchen also stumbled forward as all his strength was thrown away. Dudley's father didn't blame Suchen, and he didn't have the time and meaning. He helped Suchen and pulled him back, grabbing the hatchet. Walking towards the fierce volcano cat step by step. There is no other way at this time. Without that damn beast's sensitive senses, without that beast's vigorous pace, even the mind that humans are proud of is not much higher than that of the lynx. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Online games, I really don't want to have unlimited fusion. Author, 7 years. Chapter 693. Chapter 693 Fireball. Go back to me. At this point in the situation, the only option is to fight hard, and only to carry it to death. Can there be a glimmer of hope that we can die together and save the sun behind us? The fierce volcano cat did not move. He raised his head and looked at Dudley, who was walking towards it, and then at Suchen behind Dudley. PL mess, S. There was also a thread connected to Dudley's father's leg. Dudley's father couldn't react at all. The speed of this beast was too fast. In just a moment, the knife had only cut halfway, and he felt a sharp pain in his right leg. His face couldn't help twitching, and he suppressed a low cry and fell down. Suchen looked at his father's miserable condition, as if all the blood in his body had gathered in his brain. His eyes were red and swollen, and he howled loudly at the man who was rushing towards him. The Lihuo cat made a vertical slash. The Lihuo cat easily dodged on one side and raised its paws. Suchen let out a scream of awe and fell sideways. He looked up at his thighs and saw that due to his thinness, there was not much flesh, and white bones with claw marks could be seen on the thigh of the left leg. The volcano cat slowly walked between the two of them, squatted down on its hind legs, and looked at the miserable state of the two humans with enjoyment. Dudley's father with a roar, it rushed towards the beast. The fierce volcano cat dodged slightly and sprayed a white fireball as big as an egg towards Dudley's father's intact left leg. Dudley's father could no longer escape and suffered the consequences. With such a blow, the fireball hit his left foot, and the flames quickly spread upwards. The left foot also instantly saw bones and quickly burned to a crispy brown. Dudley's father seemed to have no pain, grabbed the hatchet and chopped it down hard. The left leg was severed from the base of the thigh and burned quickly, finally turning into a piece of charred bone. The volcano cat's decisive approach when looking at the prey in front of him seemed to have interrupted its playfulness, and it actually turned towards Mr. Dudley. Dad's right leg sprayed a white fireball. Suchen was almost dazed at this moment. This was the first time that Suchen saw such a tragic situation happening to his closest relatives in front of his eyes. And Dudley's father was even more decisive this time. When the fireball had just reached his right foot, he cut off his right foot at knee level. He struggled to crawl toward the volcano cat, and the two broken legs rubbed against the thick rotten grass, and the blood gurgled out, leaving 2 rivers of blood. At this moment, the fierce volcano cat opened its mouth again, and the third fireball had already taken shape. All the blood of Suchen on the side rushed to his brain, and his mind was buzzing. At this moment, everything in the surrounding world seemed to have stopped. Normally, Suchen saw the fireball formed in the Lihuo cat's mouth slowly spurting towards his father. But his father was crawling towards the Lihuo cat with his hands and blood-red eyes. The roots on his father's forehead, the protruding veins on his neck and hands seemed to activate some mysterious thing hidden in Suchen's brain. At this time, Suchen only had one thought, that is, bring that fireball back to me. Then Suchen passed out. In the dream, there was darkness everywhere. Suchen lay helplessly. Suchen was very scared. He was afraid of the dark, of loneliness, of the darkness. He missed his parents very much, and suddenly he saw his parents in his previous life, facing each other there. He smiled to himself. Then the 3 good friends laughed ha 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 at him without any seriousness. Online games, I really don't want to have unlimited fusion. Author, 7 years. Chapter 694. Chapter 694 Life and death depend on each other. There is also Dudley's father, Lily's mother, the beautiful and lovely sister Silly, the amiable Uncle Joer. They all seem to be whispering to themselves, Suchen, stand up, you are a man, be strong. Suchen opened his hands and happily threw himself at his relatives and friends, but in vain. The loving parents and laughing roommates said to Suchen in another place, Suchen, stand up, you are a man, be strong. Suchen knelt down to his parents in the previous life and cried, Mom, Dad, Suchen. Chen misses you so much. Well, Suchen will stand up, Suchen is a man, Suchen is the strongest. Suchen wiped away his tears and muttered to himself. At this moment, a dazzling light suddenly appeared in front of his eyes, and Suchen's narrowed eyes slowly opened. Suchen didn't know how long he had been unconscious. At this time, he was tied to his father's broad chest. His back bumped forward. Suchen struggled and shouted to his father, Dad, Dad, quickly, put me down quickly, I'm awake, put me down quickly. Dad Dudley had a faint smile on his pale, paper-like face. He stopped. His hands that untied the cane seemed to have lost all strength. He shivered for a long time before untying it. Suchen rolled down, and his steps seemed to be a little wobbly. But gritted his teeth and quickly supported his father's body. Only then did he have time to look behind him. 2 long blood marks extended from under Dudley's father's broken leg to the depths of the jungle. As an outstanding hunter, Dudley knew the situation he and his son were in. Fortunately, his son just fainted. He chewed some herbs to stop bleeding and tied them on his and his son's legs. He tied his son an inch on his back as quickly as possible. He crawled towards the direction of Balu town with every inch of his strength. He couldn't stay in that place just now. Although he didn't know why the terrifying volcano cat burned himself into coke. But there was too much blood of himself and his son there, and the thick blood was the smell will cause more trouble. In this way, Dudley didn't know how long he had been crawling. In addition to being able to barely avoid some deadly plants, he didn't know how many blood marks were scratched by barbs on his body, but his strength felt stronger and stronger. It became more and more vain. But his father's mission supported him, and his head that was buzzing had only one thought, to take his son out even if he died. Finally, his son finally woke up. Dad Dudley untied the rope. He was about to say to Suchen, "Come on, leave here quickly, leave me alone." But his nerves, which had been tense all the time, finally failed due to the momentary relaxation and he passed out. Suchen bit his lips tightly and said nothing. At this moment, he seemed to have no words. No longer feeling the pain, no longer tired, he turned over and tied Dudley's father firmly to his still thin back, and walked firmly towards the town step by step. The broken leg had already been bruised and bloody, and the branches and leaves were connected to the remaining flesh. As if giving Suchen infinite strength, he walked forward step by step. Finally, after a long time, he saw the first shadow. Suchen opened his blurry eyes and tried hard to see clearly. But it was blurry, and he shook his head. Shaking his head was also buzzing. Suchen moved his bitten lips and wanted to say something. The shadow was getting closer and closer to him. Finally, Suchen saw clearly what was in front of him. It was actually a stray animal. Seeing the hairy wild dog, Suchen's whole body trembled, and his head suddenly became clearer. Online games, I really don't want to have unlimited fusion. Author, 7 years. Chapter 695. Chapter 695 Poor Fick. The hatchet in his hand had been thrown away, and there was only a thick wooden stick that he was leaning on. Suchen stumbled and tried to raise the stick, struggling to maintain his balance. A wry smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. It seemed that the lives of father and son would be lost today. Although these wild dogs are very resistant, these beasts never like to fight alone. Sure enough, 5 or 6 wild dogs emerged from the dense forest, slowly circling around him. Suchen really had no strength. He didn't expect that he would be eaten by the animal he usually despised the most. He lamented in his heart and could only hold on to the wooden stick to hold on. Seeing that the seemingly tall prey was not in much danger, these wild dogs rushed forward and bit Suchen's leg before jumping away. Suchen sat down unsteadily, and the wild dogs around him rushed towards the delicious prey. Suchen could only watch helplessly as these wild dogs dripping with disgusting saliva rushed towards him with green eyes. Fortunately, after the wild dog bit his leg a few times, he heard the scream of the wild dog. Shashasha, a few people came out, and these wild dogs immediately ran away with howls. Suchen didn't see clearly who they were, but howled feebly in his heart. Finally he passed out happily. With a shocking scream, a half-year-old girl covered her eyes and did not dare to look at the bloody scene. She turned around and threw herself into the arms of a tall middle-aged man behind her. The middle-aged man patted the little girl's shoulder. After comforting him, he stepped forward to check on the two people in the field. Three people saved Suchen and his son in time, a middle-aged man Carl, Carl's daughter Jess, and Jess's brother Fike. Fike was behind Jess at this time, but he didn't show his head. Because just when Fike was about to walk out, he heard Jess scream, and immediately hid his fat body behind his sister. Although her sister Jess could block it, the body that was reached was less than a quarter of its size. Fike clutched her head and shook slightly. Jess really didn't know what the brother who made her speechless was afraid of, but Fike didn't see anything. Jess looked cunning. His big eyes blinked, and he said loudly and frightened, "Ah, brother, what's behind you?" Upon hearing this, Fike quickly shook his fat body and ran in front of his sister, because someone had a greater inertia. After all, inertia is related to mass. As he rushed forward without stopping, he suddenly heard a sound like a pig being killed by the fat man. With trembling plump lips, he pointed at the bodies of Suchen and his son, speechless. Carl couldn't do anything about this pair of precious children. He became numb after seeing such scenes too often. He just often sighed that the child's mother died early. The poor and tortured Suchen just saw Xiao Salai calling him happily in his dream. Suddenly, there was a scream like a killing pig, which made Suchen think that the pig from his grandma's house was coming to take revenge on him. He was so excited that he straightened up his upper body. Suddenly he saw a fat thing covering most of his eyes. The same poor Fike heard another even worse sound of killing a pig, and he actually saw the bloody ghost. The fat man is timid, Suchen can't blame him, suddenly appeared as a corpse. With her hair disheveled, she was about to pounce on him, and her eyes as big as a cow were staring straight at him. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Online games, I really don't want to have unlimited fusion. Author, 7 years. Chapter 696. Chapter 696 Rescued. Fik was about to cry. Except for the caterpillar his sister put in his pocket, nothing was more frightening than the ghost in front of him. No, I won't be afraid anymore when my sister releases caterpillars when I go back, woo. Father Carl just wanted to open his mouth to persuade, but as soon as he uttered the word Fei, he immediately wanted to slap himself in the face. Tan Shang's timid son was also poorly disciplined by himself. No, his father's voice allowed Fike to find a safe harbor and a warm embrace. The fleshy ball-like body wrapped around Dad Carl's body, and his left leg was placed on his father's waist. His right leg was too heavy to support him, so he had no choice but to put it on the ground. Looking at his son Fik hanging on his body, Carl looked helplessly at his daughter Jess, and could only ask her daughter for help. Only his ghostly daughter could feed and house Fik. Jess raised her eyes to the sky, folded her arms, opened her mouth and said, "I'm going to put caterpillars in your bed." She glanced sideways at her brother as she said that. Brother Fik was unmoved. Put 5. Fike's body was trembling slightly. 10 items. The fat man finally let go of his father, lowered his head and said to his sister, "Okay, sister, don't put caterpillars in my bed, I'm scared." Suchen was really speechless as he watched from the side, his hands itched just looking at the fat man. Forget it, he had better save his father home as soon as possible. Don't be like this low IQ human being. Then he turned to the middle-aged man and said to the middle-aged man in a clear voice as much as possible, "I couldn't help it, my lips were bitten and my tongue was bitten several times. Thank you, uncle, for saving us." Ah! This ghost can talk. Fatty Fike's horrifying voice came from the side. Suchen ignored it directly. His father's injury did not wait for anyone, and continued, "Uncle, can you bring my father to the town? My father's name is Dudley. He has lost too much blood. Please save my dad." After saying that, Suchen bent down and kowtowed to Carl. Carl hurriedly helped Suchen upright. He also checked the injuries of the two of them just now. The person on the little boy's back was already dying, and Carl himself was not a death seeker. Those who don't save say, "Little brother, I will save your father. Here is a box of white medicine to stop bleeding." As he said this, he took out a small box, called his daughter Jess over, and ordered, "Jess, you can use this box of hemostatic white medicine to stop this little brother's wound later. I'll carry this uncle back to the town for treatment first. You and your brother are waiting here, you know? Fortunately, it's not far from the town." Jess responded as she took the box. Carl untied Dudley from Suchen's back. Looking at the miserable state of the middle-aged man, he couldn't help but shake his head. He picked up Dudley, who had his legs amputated, and carried him to Balu's small hospital. Zhen ran away smoothly and quickly. Jess took a closer look at Suchen, who was sitting on the ground. She saw that there were streaks of blood all over her thin body, including blood stains on her lips and back, especially the horrific wound on one leg. The bones were clearly visible. The other leg was also connected with pieces of flesh and blood. But the boy did not cry out in pain, not even a hum. Jess felt scared when she saw Suchen with injuries all over his body. After all, he was a girl's. It would be nice not to be frightened when seeing a person covered in flesh and blood. Suchen didn't feel the pain at first, but when he saw Carl running away with his father on his back, his heart returned to him. Online games, I really don't want to have unlimited fusion. Author, 7 years. Chapter 697. Chapter 697, Being a Man Hurts. Suddenly all the pain in my body rushed to the nerves in my brain. It hurt, especially in my legs. But next to him, there was such a cute and beautiful girl staring at him with big eyes without blinking. He had to show some heroic spirit no matter what. So he had to grit his teeth and hold on. Suchen's heart was bleeding. It hurts to be a man. GC squatted down gently and carefully opened the branches and leaves covering Suchen's legs, causing Suchen to gasp in pain. These twigs and leaves have become connected with flesh and blood after such a long time. It is just like pulling one leaf and moving the whole body. Suchen thought about the difficult conditions and lacked the kind anesthetic, so he had to shout, "Hey! Fatty, fatty!" After shouting for a long time, there was no response. Suchen and Jess turned their heads together, suddenly feeling itchy in their teeth. I saw the fat man Fike holding a bush about an inch thick, sticking out his big butt and shivering. How could that poor shrub bear such a heavy fat man? The green leaves of the tree fell down. Suchen originally wanted to see how much Fatty's meat was and wanted to ask Fatty to give him a few bites so that he could cooperate with GC's treatment. Then I thought it was unrealistic and wanted the fat man to knock me out. We don't want the process, we just want the results of the treatment. But looking at Fatty's situation, he had no choice but to twist a few times, and 2 blushes appeared on his originally pale and colorless face. GC looked at Suchen strangely, and heard Suchen say intermittently that beautiful lady, Xiao Sheng, oh no, brother, this is not appropriate either, so that's me right. Suchen raised his neck and said, "I want to ask you, a beautiful lady like a woman, to knock me unconscious with a small branch to cooperate with your treatment." You said. Before Suchen finished speaking, Jess couldn't help but let out a sweet laugh. Her beautiful eyes glared at Suchen, making him look so beautiful. Just when he was wondering if this girl cares about me, he saw a thigh-thick wooden stick hit his head with a bang, and Suchen fell down without even taking a lick. The beautiful and frail Miss Jess dropped the big wooden stick and looked at the patient whose curves had been anesthetized. She bit her teeth and endured the discomfort to clean Suchen's wound and apply medicine. By the time Suchen woke up again, it was already noon the next day. The sun is shining brightly, but in this hot summer, the bright sun is not a good thing. Suchen woke up from the heat, but then there was pain all over his body. He couldn't help but hum a few times, and his nose smelled a familiar fragrance, which relieved Suchen's tense nerves a lot. Xiao Salai's nervous yet soft and sweet voice came from beside her brother Xiaodong. Brother Xiaodong, are you awake? Does it hurt? You are thirsty, I will give you some water. Suchen gradually choked up as he listened to the little girl's voice, and couldn't help but feel distressed. Just when he was about to open his mouth to say a few words of comfort, Salai was already holding a bowl of water and carefully lifting Suchen's upper body. Although Xiao Salai's movements were gentle enough, Suchen still frowned in pain. Salai looked at her brother Xiaodong as if she was in pain, not Suchen. Thinking again of seeing Suchen being carried back yesterday, tears couldn't stop falling from his eyes. Suchen looked at the little girl from the side. The two had been together since childhood, so they didn't know the reason why Salai was crying. Online games, I really don't want to have unlimited fusion. Author, 7 years. Chapter 698. Chapter 698, A Man Won't Shed Tears Easily. Li raised his hand, gently touched her little head, and said, "Does my little Salai want to shed tears to her brother Xiaodong to quench his thirst? If you cry again, the water in the bowl will overflow." Xiao Salai forced a laugh, then gently picked up the bowl and fed Suchen. Suchen drank water and looked at Xiao Salai, feeling happy. "Brother Xiaodong, I am getting married according to the decree, and my father is forcing me to do so. As a high-quality and high-character young man who has traveled through time in the 21st century, observing filial piety is my first rule." "He," Dad said, "if you decide to get married first, I will eat you in 3 or 4 years. Li, who was less than 10 centimeters away from her, was already blushing under the deep eyes of brother Xiaodong. But the young girl, who was full of love, blinked at Suchen with watery eyes. Suchen, who had just come back to his senses from the endless sexual intercourse, was disappointed by the little girl's spinach leaves, which made his face turn red, so he had to recite the Heart Sutra secretly. After a while, Suchen asked, "How is my dad? Is he okay?" From the beginning, Suchen knew from the look on this little girl's face that his dad's life was not in danger, otherwise Xiao Salai would be in front of him. Already panicked. Well, Uncle Dudley was specially invited by the mayor to have the best pharmacist for treatment. He woke up once in the morning, but he was still very weak, and... Saying this, Xiao Salai's eyes turned red. "Haha, it's okay. My dad is the same as me. This injury is a man's contribution. He survived and became a good man again." Suchen comforted with a smile. Xiao Salai's eyes became even redder. She just looked at her brother Xiaodong without blinking, but there was deep pain in her eyes. "Oh, by the way, what about the 3 people who saved our father and son? I have to thank them for their life-saving grace." Suchen asked. After they brought Uncle Dudley and brother Xiaodong back, they left. The mayor and Aunt Lily thanked them and wanted to keep them to repay their life-saving grace, but they said they had something urgent to do and left. Xiao Salai replied. Suchen responded and said nothing. The room fell into silence. Dudley's father had been sent home to recuperate in the evening. Suchen picked up the wooden stick next to the bed and hummed with each step. "I walked to my parents' room. My mother, Lily, was very haggard. In the past 2 days, the 2 men in the family had encountered such a disaster. As a responsible woman from a farmer's family, my mind was completely blank at the beginning. Fortunately, after hearing the news, the mayor came to the rescue urgently. In the past 2 days, my mother, Lily, had not slept at all. She was taking care of her husband and her son, without a moment's rest. After hearing the sound, her mother turned around and saw her son, Suchen, and hurriedly rushed to the rescue. He walked over and said, "Suchen, why are you here? Your injury hasn't healed yet. Go back and have a good rest. Mom, look at your son, he's not jumping around. As he said that, Suchen raised his hand and patted his chest. But Lily's mother saw her son's brows furrowing briefly and sighed in a low voice. This son's husband has the same temper, and he never talked about the pain, but on the surface, each one was more optimistic than the other, and each one was more cheerful than the other. My mother walked out, saying she was going to make some soup that was easy to swallow. Suchen sat beside his father Dudley's bed, looking at his father's face was a bit human. Dudley's father also looked at his son's thin figure. The two father and son just looked at each other, and suddenly they both laughed together. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Online games, I really don't want to have unlimited fusion. Author, 7 years. Chapter 699. Chapter 699, Cold Night, Family Affection. Dudley's father's laughter grew louder. The violent ups and downs touched the wound and made him frown in pain, but he still smiled. The smile seemed both joyful and heartbreaking. Suchen's laughter gradually became deeper and deeper, and he slowly bent down to the bedside, caressed his father's broken leg, buried his head and cried muffledly. The cry was suppressed and dull. Dudley stretched out his big hand and stroked his son's head, and said happily, "Okay, okay, my Dudley has a good son. My Dudley's son is not a coward, he is an upright man. Ha 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 ha." Smiling, Dudley's eyes gradually filled with tears, and he choked up in a low voice. Children, cry, if you are here, just cry loudly. Suchen finally burst into tears and said what was in his heart. Dad, I'm so scared, I'm so scared, I'm so scared that I'll never see you again, I'm scared that we'll all die there. Dudley's father pursed his lips tightly and already had tears streaming down his face. He nodded and stroked his son's thin back. In a corner outside the house, Lily's mother squatted in the dark and listened to the cry of her father and son. She covered her mouth and cried softly. Insects chirped on the summer night, and the bright moon hung high. In this cold night, there was a lingering feeling. It's all kinds of emotional pain between relatives. Suchen woke up in the morning the next day. When he opened his eyes, he saw little silly girl fanning himself beside him, looking at him with big eyes without blinking. Suchen's eyes seemed to turn to water when he looked at that girl, and couldn't help but shudder. This girl is so affectionate, and her bones will melt into pieces in the future. But it feels very useful and comfortable. After a long time, Suchen coughed twice. Xiao Salai's hazy expression finally came to her senses, her face flushed and she exclaimed. Ah, brother Xiaodong, you're awake. Suchen said in his heart, you little girl just realized that your brother Xiaodong has woken up a long time ago. He was just looking at you. Brother, I also saw that Shu Xian was too lazy. Then he said seriously, well, yes, silly. Should we avoid it? Ah. Brother Xiaodong, you are so bad, sleeping like this again. The little girl's ears turned red, and she ran out with a shameful face. Suchen smiled evilly, it seems that his previous good habits were quite deterrent, he he. But this time Suchen wore pants to sleep. Yes, my whole body was in terrible pain last night. How could I use my arms and legs to take off my pants to sleep? Suchen changed into a pair of pants and felt much better. When changing clothes, he saw that the injuries on his body were almost healed. The two legs that were most seriously injured had actually grown flesh, and the wounds were still itchy. Suchen was puzzled, but didn't think much about it. Perhaps he had an impressive physique, and he could be jumping around in 2 days after being chopped off. If this is the case, he is really a bit fantasy, no longer an ordinary person. Putting away Suchen walked out, and saw Salai, her face was still red, this little girl. Suchen went to the well to wash up, and then he saw a bunch of people coming outside, but they were the beloved mayor and the old pharmacist Zaime, followed by some security soldiers in the town. The mayor shouted Fuan, which was the most cordial Suchen had ever heard since time travel. Name. Suchen waved from a distance and shouted, Mr. Mayor, Grandpa Zaime, why did you come to my house? Are you here to see my dad? The mayor and Zaime both laughed. Online games, I really don't want to have unlimited fusion. Author, 7 years. Chapter 700. Chapter 700, Signs of the Beast Tide. Grandpa Zilly stroked his long grey beard and said with a smile, we are also here to see this little carrot like you. Ha ha ha, little Salai is here too. She looks even more beautiful. She is going to be a wife? His face couldn't withstand such jokes, and the red cheeks that had never gone away turned even brighter red, and he hugged Grandpa Zaime's arm reluctantly. Suchen protested, Grandpa Zaime, I'm already 12.5 years old. My dad said I'm a man now, not a little carrot head. Mayor Fuan laughed, yes, you are a man. If you want, you don't want Uncle Rich to be a matchmaker for you and ask for a wife, ha 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 ha. Suchen curled his lips and thought to himself, Suchen and I are 10 years younger than Uncle Rich in total. If I want to change my previous life, I will be here. But just think about it, after all, reality is cruel. Although Suchen was tall, his skinny body made him look even thinner, otherwise he would not have been promoted from stick to straw. If this continues, I might even be called Toothpick Maymang or something. Okay, all joking aside, today your Grandpa Zaime and Uncle Duolai, and I are here to see how your injuries are and to ask about the situation at the time. Look at you, you're so alive and kicking, you're recovering from your injuries so quickly. The Mayor Fuan smiled kindly. Suchen scratched the back of his head and said sheepishly, I don't know why the injury healed so quickly. Maybe it's because I have less flesh and grow faster. It heals quickly, haha. A group of people laughed, and Suchen led everyone to his father Dudley's house. Seeing the mayor coming, Dudley's father quickly called the children to greet him. The mayor grew up in the small town of Balu. But he won the hearts of the people. In Suchen's opinion, Uncle Fu is indeed worthy of everyone's thumbs up. Everything he does and thinks is for the people. Balu town has a large floating population and the public security is difficult, but in Uncle Fu's, after taking care of it, everyone lives and works in peace and contentment. Although it is not as exaggerated as not picking up things on the road, the people still understand it in their hearts. The rich uncle is fair, and Suchen knows this very well. Every time the mayor and his youngest son are beaten by him, after that, he had to be beaten by his father when he returned. There was no way, who made this great Sparran so famous. But I heard that Mr. Sparran was sent to Millida by his father 2 months ago. Went to the school in the city. Uncle Fu expressed his condolences to Dad Dudley, and asked old pharmacist Zaime to take a look again, confirming that Dad Dudley would get better as long as he rested peacefully and replenished his body. Then, the mayor politely asked the others to go out first, leaving him, Lao Zaime, guard Captain Duolai, and Suchen to talk in detail about the fierce volcano cat with Dudley's father. Talking about the scene of that day, Suchen, my father and I are still worried. Suchen doesn't know much about the situation in the mountains, but his father said before that there would be no great danger within 30 miles of the forest, but this time he actually encountered a fierce fire known as the hunter-killer bobcat, had to be suspicious. And the mayor came here just for this matter. Listening to the conversation between the mayor and the others, it turned out that in the past few months, other adventurers or hunters had reported news of unrest in the mountains. Said as he spoke, Grandpa Zaime sighed, well, it seems that Balu town is going to suffer another disaster.